Welcome to Matthew Felix On Air, coming to you from San Francisco, California. People who create, people who make a difference. Hope you had a great week. Today is a big show for me. It is the last show of the year. And, you know, it sort of feels like I've been doing this forever in a good way. But the reality is it hasn't even been a full year. And I was kind of looking at, you know, what I've done over the past 10 months. And it's really only been, like I said, about 10 months. But I started the show last February 11th. That was my first show. And I did 5 months at the internet radio station. Then I took a month off, April, May, and went to Central Asia. And now I've been doing this video podcast incarnation of the show for another 5 months. So really, it's only been 10 months. But in those 10 months, including today's show, I have done 53 hours of interviews, which has been a tremendous amount of work. I mean, really, but it's in a huge learning curve, especially with the technology side of things. But I have really loved doing it. Seriously, it's been great to have the opportunity to have conversations and get to sit across the table from people that otherwise, you know, I might not have the privilege to get to talk to and just to get to learn about what different people are doing. So like I said, it's been great. And I want to thank everyone who has watched and listened and continues to do so for doing so over the past year-ish, like I said, 10 months. And thank you for the comments while I've been online or on the air, and the likes and telling your friends and all that stuff. Because as I say each show, that's the only way the word gets out, and I really appreciate your support. And I also want to specifically thank my guests over the past 10 months. Obviously, there are too many, like I said, more than 53, probably like 60-ish guests over the past 10 months for making the time to come into the studio and share their stories. I sincerely appreciate everyone who has been a part of the show, both on the air and off of it. And I am looking forward to a whole new season next year. First, though, I really need a break. And so I'm going to take the rest of the year off, and then probably most, if not all, of January. So I'm not sure exactly. I'm either going to come back, the show will come back either the last weekend, the last Sunday of January, or the first Sunday of February. And we'll see how things, how it all falls out. But I will, of course, let you know on social media well beforehand. And if you're not big on social media, then you can sign up for my mailing list, of course, MatthewFelix.com. You can subscribe there. And I really do not send out updates very often, so you don't need to worry about your inbox being flooded by messages. Usually just every 6 to 8 weeks. You know, I have sent out a few more messages recently because I just launched the new book, but ordinarily, like I said, about every 6 to 8 weeks. Speaking of the new book, my main focus continues to be, you know, getting the book out into the world. And as those of you who have watched and listened recently are very well aware, Porcelain Travels chronicles humor, horror, and revelation in, on, and around toilets, tubs, and showers encountered on my travels. For the past few days, Porcelain Travels has once again been a #1 new release on Amazon. I'm not sure how long a book gets to be a new release because it wasn't a #1 new release for a little while, and now it's back to being a #1 new release. So I was delighted to see that, and thanks again to everyone who has ordered a copy. Thanks to the 10 readers and counting who have left reviews. It is imperative to the success, just like I was saying about the show. Well, reviews are imperative to getting to the success of a book, you know, because if you check out a book and you see 1 or 2 reviews, it doesn't really have that social proof if you haven't already heard of the author, so you might not be so sure. So getting those reviews is crucial, and I really appreciate. I got number 9 and number 10 today, and it made my day. So again, thanks to everyone who's not only bought the book, but left reviews. And if you do read the book and you like it, if you could please leave a review, it would, again, not only make my day, but really help with the long haul, getting the book out there. And the last thing I'll say about that is, you know, sometimes friends or family will say, you know, I'd like to leave a review, but I'm not sure what to write. And I always say, no, it doesn't. Please don't overthink this. It doesn't have to be a literary critique. Really, if you liked the book, you could just say it was great, I laughed out loud, or, you know, it can just be a sentence. The important thing is just to show the activity and basically give it a vote if you liked it. If you didn't like it, please don't leave a review because that doesn't help so much. I read from Porcelain Travels at a fantastic event last Friday night at the Corte Madera Book Passage. Author, filmmaker, Litwings founder, and dear friend Erin Byrne organized the event, which featured her Morocco anthology, vignettes and postcards from Morocco, in addition to my 2 books with Morocco stories. And not only did Erin and I read at the event, but so did fellow writers Doug Cordell, who of course was on my show, I guess that was just last week, right before the event. We talked about Morocco and storytelling in Morocco. and Christina Ammon and Anna Elkins as well. And Anna and Christina operate the Deep Travel Tours, Deep Travel workshops. And of course, I've mentioned those many times on this show, but I had never actually met either one of them. So it was great after talking so much and knowing so many people that have gone on those trips to finally get to meet Christina and Anna. So that was a lot of fun. As for the event itself, it's always hard to know how many people to expect. And we were kind of hoping for 30 or guessing for 30 and hoping for 40. Well, we had almost 75 people at the event. So had to keep bringing in chairs. And that was even though Dave Eggers was in the room next door. So that was really great because Dave Eggers could have completely drawn everybody away from our event to his event. So it was great that, and Book Passage was, sort of apologetic. We're sorry that we scheduled these two events on the same night. We try not to ordinarily do that, but it worked out great. The audience was great. Everyone was really engaged. Could not have been a better event. So thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Book Passage. And again, thank you to everyone who came out to the event. Last thing I'll say about my book is Porcelain Travels, of course, is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, iBooks, and just about everywhere. And of course, at Book Passage, Corte Madera, just about everywhere that paperback and ebook formats are available. I'm told they make great gifts. So please order yours today, preferably for your extended family and all your friends. And you know what? You're already online. If you're listening to this or watching this right now, why not do it while you're watching? I'm just going to throw that out there. Okay, so while you're placing your orders, I also wanted to tell you for the first time about where I'm doing this show, because I've never actually said where I'm doing the show because it's a space that's been in progress the past 5 months that I've been here, and they haven't really done their official unveiling yet. But I asked Naomi today if maybe now would be a good time, since this is my last show of the year, to mention the space. And so I'm going to mention the space. It is it's a soon-to-be-launched literary center called WordSpace Studios, and it is here in San Francisco in the Noe Valley neighborhood of San Francisco. And it is, like I said, it's still in the works, but they've made so much progress over the past 5 months getting the space in shape to do what they're going to do here. And what they're going to do is a lot of different stuff. They're going to have writing workshops. They're going to have book clubs, and they're even going to have residencies. So if you are interested in a residency, if you maybe don't live in the Bay Area, but you'd like to come to the Bay Area, work on your writing, live in a beautiful neighborhood in a beautiful city, and like I said, just really kind of, although I don't know, sometimes it might be hard to focus on your writing here in San Francisco, but anyway, like I said, they're taking applications now for the residencies here. And so you can go to wordSpacestudios.com and you can submit an application there. And I know that they already have one residency lined up already. So if you think that might be something you're interested in, don't wait around. Get on it now. Okay. And the other thing I should say is, some of the people that do those residencies might end up being on my show if the scheduling works out and if you're working on something that's far enough along and it's the right sort of subject matter, because we've already talked about that with, like I said, with that one resident or the one person who's going to come to a residency. We've talked about that as a strong possibility as well. So another reason that you might want to consider checking this out. Okay. No doubt so much more I could say, but Sivani is sitting over here and she is ready to get on the show and talk about dark sky conservation, and I'm ready to do my last show of the year. So Sivani Babu is the co-founder and creative director of online travel magazine Hidden Compass. She is an award-winning writer and photographer who has contributed to BBC Travel, CNN, Backpacker, Outdoor Photographer, Nature Photographer, Iron Horse Literary Review, and Expressions, the North American Nature Photography Association's annual showcase of the best nature photos. Sivani is a graduate of the University of Chicago, where she studied economics and education policy, and at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. She also served as an 8th grade math teacher with Teach for America before becoming a trial attorney. Ultimately, though, Sivani's love of adventure and storytelling took her away from a career as a federal public defender and sent her sailing across the Drake Passage to Antarctica, chasing storms through Tornado Alley, searching for polar bears in the Arctic, and you need to read that story. I think that story is on Hidden Compass. We'll ask her because that's a great story. I love her Drake Passage story, but I also really, really love the polar bear story. And road tripping across the United States with a former teacher of hers from high school. Most importantly, all those experiences eventually led Sivani today to her second appearance on Matthew Felix on air. Welcome, Sivani.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. Hey, can you turn that a teeny bit? Yeah, that way? Yes, perfect. That's good.
All right, great.
Thanks. So you mentioned we crossed paths, whatever, because we crossed paths fairly often. And
Yes.
you mentioned that you, several months ago, I think, that you were going to do an article on dark sky conservation. And right away, a split second later, I think I just said, oh, I want you to be on the show if you would like to talk about it. Because it's not something I know much about, but I had heard about it. And so I was just familiar with the concept, and it just seemed so important and interesting. And so when I heard that you were going to get into the nitty-gritty of that, I just knew that I wanted to have you on to talk about it. So, like I said, I had heard about it, know just a little bit about it.
Sure.
So, but can you tell us what is dark sky conservation, and maybe a little bit about how you came to do an article about it?
Sure. So dark sky conservation, pretty simply, is a movement to preserve the darkness in our skies, in our night skies. And it's come about because of how pervasive light pollution has become. Mm-hmm. And we think about light pollution, we often think of what we call astronomical light pollution, which is, we can no longer see the stars. Mm-hmm. But the effects of light pollution are so much more far-reaching than just that.
Okay.
And so you have these communities and these places where they're trying to make sure that future generations are still able to look up at the night sky and see the stars, that the animals and the people and all the things that are affected by artificial light at night, that they get to have that darkness that we all need.
Right. So who asked you, can you tell us who asked you to do the article? I don't know where you are in the publication process because it hasn't been published, right?
It hasn't been published yet. So
we can't talk about
I'm not sure that
okay.
I'm just not sure.
All right. So it's a secret. We're not going to talk about that. But what about your own interest in the night sky? Because I saw a couple posts and things that seem to suggest that you were interested in this long before they asked you to do the article.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about your interest in
Sure.
the subject.
Well, I grew up with the night skies. I grew up in a place where we could stand out on the driveway at my parents' house and look at the Milky Way.
Oh, wow.
And I grew up in California. We'd go to India sometimes to visit grandparents and things like that.
Right.
And there too, because electricity was, the town got dark at night.
Yes.
And so we would lay out on the terrace at my grandparents' house, and you could see, just the darkest skies and so many more stars than I was used to seeing.
Right.
And then also my parents are very into astronomy and things like that. So I've always kind of had a draw to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I was, I think that people that haven't had those sorts of experiences really can't have the appreciation. It's the sort of thing you have to experience. And for me, it was when I was in the Sahara.
Yeah.
And I grew up in the burbs, and we could see a lot of stars and stuff. I think occasionally we could see the Milky Way, occasionally. But it wasn't really until I went to the Sahara and I was out in the dunes. And it was the same scenario where after a certain time, the village just didn't have any electricity.
Exactly.
So every single light, and there weren't even generators.
Right.
Or if they were, maybe they were just for emergencies or something. When I was there, and this was in Morocco, speaking of Morocco, and so we were on this roof deck, or the top of our hotel, which was just this single structure, adobe structure, and all of a sudden the lights go out, and we didn't know what was going to happen.
Right.
And the whole sky just lit up, and I was just blown away.
Yep.
Again, you don't have this appreciation until you experience it.
Absolutely.
So that being the case, and you just alluded to this, but let's talk a little bit more about, why do we need to conserve the nighttime sky? You just mentioned light pollution. So let's start with that. What do we mean specifically by light pollution? Because I know, of course, it means lights that are on at night. You've got a strip mall that's still got the lights on.
Right.
But can you talk a little bit maybe about a little more technical definition? And then when I was reading up on today, it talked about, what are they called? I'm going to cheat here again and use sky glows.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about
that?
that?
So there are really three types of light pollution.
Okay.
So sky glow is one. And sky glow is when you get these domes of light over populated areas. And it's caused by light that's, being sent upward into the sky.
Yeah.
And it scatters in the atmosphere, and you get, I think we've all seen it if you've driven down sort of a lonely road towards a city.
Right.
You see the city long before you see the lights from the city.
Yeah.
Pretty early.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's sky glow.
Sky glow.
And it can wash out the stars. Any of us who've been in a city and you look up at the sky, you just don't see a whole lot anymore.
Right.
And that's sky glow predominantly. There's also glare, which is, think about your windshield when there's a car coming at you with their headlights on.
Right.
And all of a sudden you're blinded. temporarily for a second. That's glare. So that's also a type of light pollution.
Yep.
And then the other is light trespass, which is essentially someone's light on another piece of property invades your space. It's trespass in that sense.
Interesting.
And those are the kind of the three things that people talk about when they talk about light pollution.
Okay. And one of the things along those lines that I saw also was that most light pollution is caused by what? I'm going to put you on the spot here and see.
Most light pollution is caused by...
It's really obvious, actually. So it's not a trick question.
I was going to go with outdoor lighting.
Well, yeah, but street lights.
Street lights, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Which again makes sense, but yeah, I just thought that was interesting because I thought, well, maybe there's more going on here, and it's like, no, we just have a lot of street lights.
We have a lot of street lights. We have a lot of places that are in what they think is in the name of safety that are lighting their space. Talk about that. You know, shopping malls and parking lots and things like that.
Right. So another thing then along these lines that was really interesting was just the scale of light pollution. Because again, like you just said, we've all been probably on country roads driving towards the city and we see that dome of light. We're all probably familiar with that. And so that makes sense, and that wasn't really surprising, right?
Right.
But somebody that somebody just that's researching all of this just created this new world atlas of artificial night brightness, and this was in Science Advances, sciencemag.org, Fabio Falchi and et al. And can you tell us a little bit about that? Because they made some pretty astounding. I did this last week too. I did that too. I did that last week. I brought two words together. But yeah, tell us a little bit about what they found, because it's really astonishing.
It is. And it was, so the newest version of this came out in 2016. It was an update from a previous atlas on artificial night sky brightness.
Yep.
And the newest version, the statistics are pretty they're surprising and kind of concerning in a very big way, right? But according to this study, and they used satellite imagery, nighttime satellite imagery, and they also used light measurements in places and things like that. But 80% of the world and 90% of the U.S. and Europe lives under light-polluted skies.
Right.
And the Milky Way has disappeared, according to them, for about a third of humanity.
Yes.
But in the U.S., that number is much, much higher. And in North
80%.
America, it's 80% in North America, 60% in Europe.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I think about those numbers, and then I go back to what I grew up with. Can't see the stars like you could from my parents' house anymore.
Even
same
where
house,
they live. Right,
you can't see near. I mean, you can still see the stars. It's not completely blown out like it would be in a city, but it's not like it used to be.
Yeah, and there's just more development,
There's more development. The city has definitely grown. I mean, my hometown, since we moved there when I was 2, has tripled in size. So it's grown. So there's definitely a lot of that, but there's also been, as we improve technology in some ways. So streetlights have gone, a lot of them have gone LED, and you get the bright blue and the white light that are really bright and very harsh. And those do a lot of damage too. I mean, in terms of washing out the sky around you.
Yeah. I just want to give another statistic that was really interesting. So the most light polluted country is Singapore. Do you know the statistic I'm going to throw out?
I think so, but go for it.
The entire population lives under skies so bright. So the entire population, I mean, I know it's pretty limited geographically, but still, the entire population lives under skies that are so bright that the eye cannot fully dark adapt to night vision.
Yes. Yeah, I've read that.
And so, I mean, and we're going to talk about the ramifications of that, both environmentally and for we humans as well, for us humans as well. But then scientists estimate that in 10 years, America will have only 3 dark patches of land where people can be able to clearly see the Milky Way.
Yeah, and this is another study, and the 3 places are, one of them is located in Oregon, Idaho, so it's eastern Oregon, southeastern Oregon, western Idaho. The other is in Utah and Nevada, so that border in there.
Yeah.
And then the last one is the Colorado Plateau, so Utah and Arizona.
Yeah.
But of those 3, the only one that's really safe, that they feel confident will still exist in 10 years right now, is the one in Idaho and Oregon.
Really?
The
so
other
just one
2,
of the 3,
ultimately. They suspect that the other 3 will still be there.
Yeah.
But they're both threatened by major cities. So the Nevada-Utah area is Las Vegas, and then the Colorado Plateau, it's Phoenix.
Yeah.
And so
Phoenix, it's just growing.
Right. And so
control,
and again, this is a projection based on sort of the trends that have been occurring. But we're talking about pervasive environmental alteration, right? But of all of our environmental concerns, this is one that's pretty easy to fix.
And again, we're going to talk about that. But, you just mentioned a second ago, you mentioned this concept of trespassing. And I don't know if this is the same concept or a variation on that theme, but we just talked about Vegas. Well, again, something I was reading prior to the show talked about how even in protected areas like Death Valley that we think of as protected because we've set them aside so that they will be protected, the light pollution ignores those sorts of protections. And so basically places that we think are, again, shut off, light pollution can be a problem there. You can be in Death Valley and see Vegas in the distance.
Well, and that's the thing is part of it too is people don't realize just how far light can travel and just how much effect that light that's 100 miles away can have on a place.
Yeah. I just thought that was so interesting because all these other sort of environmental threats are more physically containable or more geographically containable, but light, again, totally different beast or totally different. Yeah.
But at the same time, so much of our light pollution is caused because we're lighting the sky instead of the ground. It's easy fix.
Yeah. So again, hold that thought. But that was something that was really interesting to me is, wait, we're pointing all these lights up at the sky?
Right.
Why are we doing that? So we're going to talk about that. But let's talk about one of the main issues that results from all of this. So we've kind of just given the context here for the problem that's out there and sort of laid the groundwork for that, although I guess groundwork's the wrong term to use. But it's nice to see the stars. It's nice to see the Milky Way. It's inspiring. It's beautiful. We become awestruck. But philosophically, not talking about the specific ramifications, but just philosophically, why does it matter for us to need to be able to see the stars in the Milky Way?
I think humans are sort of inherently self-centered creatures. and that's
do you think? Yeah.
And
why do you say that? Yeah.
We need to be humbled. Right? We need that. And it gives us a chance to put our lives and our existence in the broader context, which I think is extremely important. Gives us a chance to think about things beyond our immediate life. Right? And at the same time too, we literally are made of the universe.
Stardust, right?
Stardust, Carl Sagan. I mean, the nitrogen in our bodies, the oxygen, the carbon, it all came from out there. And you can feel like you're part of that if you can actually see it.
And if you don't even think about the fact that it's out there, then you're much less likely to make that connection. And pose those sorts of questions.
Exactly. Yeah. And the things when anyone who's ever spent time under a bright night sky, the way your mind wanders and the way that possibilities seem endless. And, the ideas that come to people at those times, it's spectacular. And you think about someone like Van Gogh, right? And the Starry Night.
Okay. Well, that's one of my next things. So let's just go there because you talk about Van Gogh in your article a little bit. So tell us, and I read in other articles, and I saw a picture, the before and after, that I loved, and I was almost going to bring it, I forgot. So tell us about Van Gogh and how he relates to this theme, this subject.
Well, so the Starry Night is a painting. It's one of his most enduring works. Right, and he painted it from behind the bars of his asylum window. But he had previously, it had become kind of an artistic mission of his to try and capture the night sky. And he had written in letters about how there's so much more color at night than people think. And he wanted to capture that, and he didn't know if he could. And so, there were a couple trials. There were a couple other paintings of the night sky that eventually led to this one. And I got to spend time with a gentleman in Texas named Bill Wren, who is the head of the Dark Skies Initiative at the MacLeod Observatory. And so this is where a lot of this came from, sitting with him and talking to him. And he, had this thing about how one night he couldn't sleep, and he was thinking about Van Gogh, and he was thinking about, would Van Gogh have been inspired to create this painting, this masterpiece that we all know, if he had lived in that town today? And he pulled up what the light pollution map looks like today.
I love this,
and it's it's very light polluted. There's a lot of light. There's a lot of artificial light at night. And Bill created what his interpretation of what this might have looked like if Van Gogh were trying to paint it now.
Right. Very
and
different.
It's fascinating. It's very different. It's very different, and it's fascinating. And you have to wonder, and this is something that Bill said, and I agree. You have to wonder, what are we missing out on when people are no longer inspired? What kind of art? What kind of creations? What kind of science and thought processes? I mean, what are we losing because we can't look up at the night sky and wonder?
Yeah. Exactly. And one of the quotes I read, and this, I can't remember, is darksky.org. That's not the same organization that you were just talking about.
It's not the one I was talking about, but that's
another.
So that's the International Dark Sky Association.
Yeah.
And they're very involved in sort of this conservation movement. They were established in 1988. They're out of Tucson, a nonprofit out of Tucson.
Yeah. Well, my friend from Tucson just joined as you said that. Irony of ironies. Hello, Erilyn. Hello, Susan. So I want to read a quote from that website, though, that just kind of encapsulates what we're talking about, but because they just made the point really nicely. Before the advent of electric light in the 20th century, which is another thing that it's just kind of nice to be reminded of, we haven't had light for very long.
Correct. Right.
Which is so easy to lose sight of, right? Especially with all the other technology that has happened in the past, several decades. We haven't even had light for very long.
Right.
So before the advent of electric light in the 20th century, our ancestors experienced a night sky brimming with stars that inspired science, religion, philosophy, art, and literature, including some of Shakespeare's most famous sonnets. So, I think it would be very easy just to kind of brush off, well, yeah, it's nice to see the stars, but it's really not that big a deal. And I don't think it's very easy just to not stop and think, wait, this has a huge, like you said, it's our relationship with reality. It's our relationship with the entire universe and where we fit in and how we fit in. And it really matters really, really deeply in lots of different ways and lots of different areas. And it's not just the arts. It's also science and obviously astronomy. And so I thought that quote really summarized
because,
it. But,
a kid looking up at the sky who sees the Milky Way, there are all sorts of possibilities, right? When they think about what they want to do in the future that just don't exist when you don't see it.
Right. And Carl Sagan had a quote that I think I got this from you, quote, "Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark." Again, that's Carl Sagan.
Right.
So it ain't just all about us.
It's not.
And the sky helps us to remember that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's sort of...
Well, so there's another quote I love, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I won't get it exactly right, but it's Omar Bradley, the general.
Okay.
And he said something to the effect of, we need to start navigating by the stars, steering by the stars again.
Yeah. I'm sorry. We're laughing because I've got a dog in the studio, and we're not sure what was going on in there. Hopefully, it sounded as if he was making some sort of progress towards not being in that room anymore, but he seems to have calmed back down. All right. So sorry about that. All right. So the quote was?
The quote was something to the effect of, we need to start navigating by the stars instead of by the light of each passing ship.
Oh.
Which I think is a great point in our sort of everyday lives. Right. There is a bigger picture, and it's so easy to get caught up in the little things. And it's nice to every once in a while just have that reminder that it's a lot bigger.
Right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, because again, that's sort of why it matters philosophically and spiritually and on those sorts of levels. But what most people probably don't realize is that there are real consequences. It's not just you turn a light on. I mean, there are real consequences to the light pollution, and they take different forms: environmental, human, energetic. So let's talk about environmental, because this was fascinating to me, because most of them are not things I would have thought of.
Right.
Now, when I read them, I'm not surprised. It makes sense. But they're not, again, it's just not stuff that we would ordinarily think about, which I think is also part of why this is so important.
Yes.
But for nocturnal animals in particular, I mean, that makes sense because...
there's no night.
Right.
It changes predator-prey relationships. It does all sorts of things on that front.
Right. So that one makes sense. But the New York Times broke it down into, got a lot more specific. And so they talked about, for example, with birds.
Yes.
So can you tell me a little bit about why it matters to birds? Because, again, not surprising, but it mattered more and in more ways than I might have thought.
Yeah, well, so birds get attracted to brightly lit buildings at night. They fly into them, migratory paths. It kills a lot of birds.
Yeah.
They get disoriented. So a lot of the effects on animals stem from orientation and disorientation. Some animals get a boost in orientation, right? The hunters, the predators, and some of those predator-prey relationships, all of a sudden, they can see better.
And they get basically an unfair advantage.
Right.
So to speak.
Yes. Yeah. And then there are there are animals that are on the other side of that, where they get the disorientation. And birds are, a lot of birds are firmly on the disorientation side. And it's not just birds.
Yeah.
Right. It's also sea turtles.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
I want to throw out a quick statistic about the birds, though.
Okay.
Because the turtles is the next one I was going to ask you about. But this statistic, again, about the birds.
Right.
I mean, it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But because we said a lot, I want to quantify a lot. According to the New York Times, between 100 million and 1 billion birds crash into buildings across North America every year, according to FLAP. I'm not sure who FLAP is, but that's a perfect acronym given what they do. I didn't notice that. When I was taking these notes, I didn't even make the connection. Some of those deaths are caused by reflective windows during the day.
Yes.
So it's not all night. But a lot of it is by the bright lights at night. So I just thought that was really surprising. Okay, so tell me, though, about the baby turtles.
So the baby
this is
turtles,
another just heartbreaking one.
So when
we're
they
just gonna be sobbing by the end of by the end of this conversation. But yeah, tell me about the turtles and how they get screwed. Yeah.
So the baby turtles, when they hatch, obviously they're trying to make their way to the ocean, and the way they have typically done that, the way we understand it, is that there are two things. One is they're moving away from low silhouettes, so things that are low to the ground, and usually those are dunes and vegetation. That's what they've been.
Yep.
And so they move away from that, which helps them get to the ocean.
Sure.
Beachfront lighting takes away those silhouettes, and so they don't know where to go. And similarly, they also use things like the moonlight and the natural discoloration on the horizon and things like that as things to attract them towards the ocean.
Right.
And so when we light the sky, we take away their ability to use those environmental cues that they've used for ever,
millions of years, however long they've been around.
Right.
The New York Times article referred in that the subtitle of that section on the turtles was called "Beached Babies." Oh, that's just so sad. All right.
Is sad.
All right. Let's move on before it just gets too morose here, and let's talk about some other disaster. What were you going to say?
Well, there's one thing that's also interesting.
Yeah.
And these are studies that are still coming out, but there was a study done fairly recently, in the last few years, that indicated that birds that were infected with West Nile virus stayed infectious almost twice as long as birds. The ones that stayed infectious were exposed to artificial light at night.
Oh, it
so they didn't necessarily. They didn't. More of them didn't die. They didn't have a harder time dealing with the illness. It didn't take them any longer to recover from the illness, but they were infectious for a longer period of time.
Interesting.
Which is just, we don't know what that means.
Right.
We don't know what that means, but it is, there's so much we don't know about the effects of light pollution.
Right. Because again, if we're looking at the scale of time that the planet has existed, it's just not even a fraction of a second.
Right.
And we can't have any idea.
Exactly. And so there's another person I spoke to who's a
idea.
lighting architect out of Houston who's sort of kind of fighting this uphill battle. He's part of fighting an uphill battle in Houston to get the city to adopt dark sky friendly lighting.
Yep.
But, he made this great point about how for almost the entirety of human history, right, the only light we've had is a firelight.
Right.
Right. That's the light we adapted to. Mm-hmm. And now in the last just handful of generations, I mean, it hasn't been, like you said, it hasn't been very long at all.
Right.
We're talking about constant light at night. Mm-hmm. And our bodies aren't adapted to that.
Right.
For a variety of reasons. But it makes sense when you think about just the evolution of people.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. But another non-people thing I want to talk about before we move on to people, because we are going to talk about that. Because this one, so again, the birds make sense, the turtles make sense, still breaks my heart. The turtles in particular, for some reason, even though I love birds, I'm a bird watcher. I love the birds, but but I mean, just again, the image of these baby turtles getting screwed,
I know, they're
it's
baby
just
turtles,
so unfair.
Right?
It's so unfair.
They already have it hard,
right? Exactly.
Right? They don't
they're
need
like
extra obstacles.
They're like
They're going to get picked up by seagulls, and they have all sorts of other things that are going to prey on them.
And
they don't need our help.
Finny things that aren't even really legs to get them to the water. Anyway, it's horrible. But one of these things that was really interesting in the realm of the nature things is that more than 130 species of coral on the Great Barrier Reef spawn new life by moonlight. Mm-hmm. I don't know if there's more to say about that, but that was just fascinating to me.
Right, and again, when you have artificial light, it confuses things.
Right.
And so you have the coral that are spawning at the wrong time. You have salmon that change their runs, that change their patterns to
really? Yes. Relative to light. Wow.
And so it causes problems, and it potentially threatens the existence of some of these animals.
Right. And if it's threatening the existence of some of these animals, it's threatening our existence.
Sure.
Ultimately.
Well, and
if it does enough, it affects enough of these animals.
It's certainly threatening our health in the more immediate.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So again, nature, we've got that one covered, and there are more examples that we haven't even talked about that, but I think we've made that point. So let's talk about how it impacts us humans, and not just again philosophically, but physiologically. So just tell me about some of those impacts, some of those effects.
It's everything you'd expect from having too much light. I mean, we rely on the darkness. That's usually when we sleep. It's when we regenerate. And when we don't have that, there are health consequences, right? Mm-hmm. It's lack of sleep. It's, we've talked about the philosophical stuff.
Right. Depression,
because, in part because of lack of sleep.
Right.
Doesn't help.
Feeds, yep.
All of these things, it's a cycle. They all feed into each other.
But there were a few here that really, again, surprised me, right? Because, the sleeping cycles, the circadian... But diabetes, breast cancer, prostate cancer, things like that. Now, I'm sure that those are more tenuous.
Right. These are all things where I go back to correlation doesn't necessarily imply causation.
So you're less convinced about those sorts of things.
I just don't know. It's not that I'm convinced. It's just we don't know.
But a lot of people are suggesting that, because I saw that in multiple articles.
That certainly is coming up. And we just don't know.
Yeah. But even the possibility is interesting, that they're thinking that there probably are some connections.
Right. And these are all, when we talk about the effects of sleep deprivation, I mean, we talk about some of these health effects that are consequences of not getting enough sleep.
Right.
And there's so much we don't know. There's so much research to be done, and that's kind of where we are in it.
Yeah. Okay. So the last effect. So we talked about the animals, the natural world. We talked about the human impact on us physiologically. And then there's one, again, that is really obvious, but I've got such a great quote, just the energy that it takes to keep the lights on at night.
And so the estimates are that we waste $2 billion per year in the U.S. every year.
Lighting things we don't need to light.
Things we don't need to light. So $2 billion and I think 17 billion kilowatt hours, if I got that correct. And that's insane.
Right.
And unnecessary.
Right. Well, the statistic that I saw, in addition to what you just quoted, which I didn't read, but just to make the point even that much, not that we need to, but I just love some of these statistics really help you to get a sense.
Right.
Because the magnitude is so big, it's hard to have a sense. So the statistic that I have in my notes here is from the Losing the Dark video, which is on darksky.org. Mm-hmm. And it's a 6-minute video. It's an interesting video, worth checking out. But the quote that the statistic that I'm going to quote is 100 watt light bulb, so just a basic standard light bulb, turned on every night for a year, takes the equivalent energy output from burning a half ton of coal. Yep. That's one light bulb. So then I started thinking, damn, we've got a lot of coal. And I know coal, of course, is a big issue today. Right. But again, it just really helps to put things in perspective, and it's just crazy. It
does. Yeah. And if anyone is unsure of just how pervasive it is, these light pollution maps, these satellite images of the U.S., the world at night, but particularly the U.S. And the U.S. is really fascinating because there is a pretty clear line down the middle of the U.S. 10 years ago, it was a little bit more clear, and things are starting to move, over the line. Yeah. But it was very clear that everything east of that line was very light polluted, right? And one of the people I spoke to when we were talking about it, he's like, everything east of that is toast. Right? That's how he described it. Yeah. And everything west of that, there were pockets of serious darkness. Yep. And that line is I-35.
Okay.
That's what that line is.
Mm-hmm.
And it runs right through the middle of the U.S., runs right through the middle of Texas.
Yeah.
I mean, splits it in two.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I went to Texas when I wrote my
this
story.
article. Yeah. Yeah. And before I forget, where can people see that map? Do you remember off the top of your head where that map?
So they are in that atlas of the new atlas of artificial night sky brightness. Their images there.
Yeah.
And if you Google it, they come up in a bunch of different places because
they're. Yeah. It's worth taking a look. It's really interesting to actually see the visual.
Yes.
It's really interesting. Okay. So speaking of that map and speaking of the organization that did that map, but not necessarily specifically that organization, but who and how is raising awareness about this? Because you went to Texas specifically because there is one group in particular in Texas, and you talked with some of this group. Can you tell me a little bit about the astronomers out there and how they were impacted and how they're trying to mitigate the impact?
Yeah. So McDonald Observatory is a part of the University of Texas.
Okay.
And they have an observatory out in the Davis Mountains. People don't really think of the mountains when they think of Texas. But out in West Texas, the Davis Mountains are there, and they're I think they're cool because they're a sky island.
Oh,
which is
cool.
Essentially they're these mountains that rise out of the desert. So they have mountains and you have desert, and there's not like the transition that you would expect.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool.
Kind of like Australia, like the like an Ayers Rock sort of thing, or it sounds a lot bigger, a lot
yeah, because it's more of
it's a real region.
It's a range, like a mountain range kind of thing going on. Yeah. But up in the mountains, they've had this observatory for quite some time, and for the first 7 decades of that observatory's existence, the brightest thing on the horizon was El Paso, and this is going back to cities far away can have an effect, right? It was El Paso, 165 miles away, roughly.
Yeah.
Right, and that was the brightest thing they could see on their horizon.
Yep.
And that started to change about 10 years ago. And they started to notice that the northeastern sky was getting brighter. And, again, this is important for them because there is major scientific research that's done here. And these skies around this observatory have been and continue to be some of the darkest in the world, certainly some of the darkest in the continental U.S.
Yeah.
So they're important
really
skies.
Important, right.
And they're also, from a latitude perspective, they're in a good position as well. So they're in a strategic position.
As far as what we want to see up there.
What you want to see and what you can see, because more of the sky is visible for more of the time. It's just because of where the latitude is.
Right.
And how things move across the sky as we rotate and whatnot.
Yep.
And they started to notice the brightening of the sky. And again, it hasn't gotten to a point where it's threatened research at all. Their goal is to just keep it from getting there.
Yep.
They want to stop that.
Right. It's the trend that they're worried about. Yeah.
Right. And again, this goes back to it's an easy fix. It's not always a cheap fix, but it's a simple fix for the most part.
Right.
And so they have sort of and so going back to what was causing this, it's the Permian Basin. And the Permian Basin is oil rich. It's in the middle of an oil boom. Even when the bottom fell out of oil prices, people flocked to the Permian Basin because it was proven ground. It was proven ground. So they stopped doing the things that might not yield them money, and they went to the place where they knew that they would.
Sure bet.
Yeah, exactly. And so as that occurred and as the rigs came, and it's not just the oil rigs, right? Everything that follows the oil rigs and the oil operations.
Yeah.
So it's the hotels and it's the stores and the commerce, all those
different
things that
service
come.
industries that have to support the people who are doing the work.
Exactly.
Basically. Yep.
And so they started to see this brightness. And what ended up happening is Bill Wren, who is the head of this Dark Skies Initiative, he's been with the observatory for 30 years. He is a self-taught astronomer. He likes to say that he's an educator. He didn't like to call himself a scientist, but he knows.
Yeah. He
right?
knows. Yeah.
It's sort of a lifelong passion for him.
Right.
And he was he was tutoring astronomy students when he was studying psychology and other things.
Okay.
Right. He's one of those guys.
Yeah.
So it became sort of his mission to educate and to work with the oil and gas industry to change the lighting on these rigs.
Yeah.
And what he found, and what's always wonderful to hear, is that nobody's trying to ruin the skies. Right? That's not the goal for anybody.
Right.
And so a lot of these companies were very responsive. And there was one company in particular who told him, all right, fix this oil rig, light it the way it should be lit.
Oh, okay.
And let's see what happens.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about this is for these companies, there's actually a long-term, there are more benefits than, yes, they want to be good neighbors and they want to help the observatory, but there's a lot in it for them too.
It's good business.
It's good business. It's energy saving. So it's cost effective. And it's also, it impacts safety. It's safer.
So tell us about that, because again, it seems we would think that, well, the more lighting, the better, because it helps us to see better.
Right.
But it's not that straight. It's not that simple.
It's not. It's not at all.
Tell us about that. Yeah.
Well, think about driving down a dark highway, and all of a sudden there's a car coming at you, and you get the flash of the headlights, and what happens, right? You can't see anything else.
Yep.
You can't see the things that you could see a moment ago. And outdoor lighting is a lot like that. It creates, the brighter the light, after a certain point, you get contrast, and so you might be able to see what's right in that light, but you can't see anything around it, because our eyes adjust to the brightest point.
Okay.
That's what our eyes adjust to.
Right, makes sense.
So if you can get the same amount of visibility, and if in fact more visibility, by using low lighting and evenly lighting things than using one bright light.
Right. It's kind of like when you're on stage and you've got all the lights on you, you can't see 10 feet in front of you.
Exactly.
That's the far end of the what the example would be like. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so fortunately the companies, they got it. They saw that it made more sense. It saved money. It's good for them. It's good for the environment and our astronomer friends.
But it's still a process.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still a process. And so
people don't like change.
People don't like change. A lot of the oil companies have gotten on board, but there's still also, all of the stores and shopping malls and all of those things that come on, and that's a different thing. The oil and gas companies, there's a connection. A lot of those guys, a lot of the folks who work for those companies went to the University of Texas. They know MacLeod Observatory.
Okay.
And so there is something of a connection there.
Makes it easier to kind of get your foot in the door to talk about
right. But
these
when
issues.
you're dealing with these big, gas stations and things like that, it takes a little bit more work.
Some other part of the
It takes a little bit more work, and it's not that people aren't responsive. It's knowing who you need to talk to.
Right. And getting their ear.
But so that's the observatory. But the cool thing about the IDA, which is the International Dark Sky Association out of Tucson that we were talking about, and they have a Texas chapter, but they have this certification program for dark sky places. And I think it's important to know that these are places that have applied for these certifications. There are plenty of places that do these things anyway. They just don't get the certification because they haven't asked for it, and they haven't,
Yeah.
But the certification has been helpful to a lot of places because it works as a tourism draw. So that's helpful. And there are quite a few of them throughout the Southwest. And so you can have a dark sky park, or you can have a dark sky community. There are dark sky sanctuaries, which are more remote. And there are these different classifications. And in Texas, you have a number of dark sky parks, including Big Bend, both the Big Bend National Park and also Big Bend Ranch State Park.
Okay.
And then a number of other state parks. And then you have a few communities that have also sort of taken it upon themselves to preserve this.
And Flagstaff was the first.
Well, Flagstaff in Arizona was the first.
Yeah.
Flagstaff did
You're talking about in Texas, though, but both places.
But Flagstaff is sort of the poster child for what this should look like.
Okay.
Because if you look at Flagstaff, about the same size as Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Okay.
With a light pollution footprint that's 14 times smaller than Cheyenne.
Interesting. Which goes to show what could be done.
Exactly.
Right.
And part of that, too, is Flagstaff started this process. They passed lighting ordinances in Flagstaff of almost, I think, 60 years ago. And because they had an observatory to protect. That's a big part of it.
Okay. Yeah.
And they've become a dark sky city.
Yep.
Because, and again, there are images of the light pollution from Cheyenne versus Flagstaff also that are fascinating.
Okay.
Because it's just this dome of light over Cheyenne.
Right.
And there's almost nothing over Flagstaff.
Yeah. To your point about Flagstaff having the observatory, and so this was a good economic motivator, I got this statistic. I don't know where I got this one. I usually have my notes, but I'm just going to read this statistic regardless. Astronomy, space, and planetary science fields bring Arizona $252.8 million annually.
Yes.
So besides all the other stuff we just got talking about, we can't overlook the fact that astronomy itself is an industry.
Absolutely.
That needs to be protected.
Right.
And so sometimes that's a very compelling
it's a tourism draw
for this sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's a tourism draw.
Yeah.
And even at MacLeod Observatory, was talking to Bill about how things had changed over the years, and the number of people who visit the astronomy now versus who visited it, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, it's orders of
roof.
Magnitude larger.
Right.
It's significant.
Right. Okay, so we've talked about these communities that are making these changes and getting certified and going in the right direction with regards to light pollution and limiting it. What are some of the specific steps that people, organizations, businesses can take to? So we talked about for example, we're lighting the skies.
Right.
So what can we do so that our lights aren't pointed up at the skies? What can be done? Some concrete things.
I mean, quite literally, pointing lights down is
okay. But who's pointing lights at the sky? How and why does that happen?
Think about because they're trying to cast a wider field, right?
Okay.
The light goes further out. They think
Okay.
if they tilt it a little bit, and think about unprotected light fixtures, right? So you have a light and it's not shielded, so you're going to light the sky.
Right. So it's not that the light is necessarily directed up at the sky.
No.
It's just that maybe it's a globe.
Right.
And so
It's a
half of it's
globe.
going up.
Exactly.
Or that sort of thing.
Right. Or it's any shape and it's unshielded. I mean, that's a big part of it.
Okay.
And the IDA has worked with works with lighting companies to create dark sky friendly lighting. There's also a problem out there with things that are advertised as dark sky friendly aren't really dark sky friendly.
Oh God.
It's one of those things.
Right.
Right. But at very basic level, it's about shielding the lights so that they point downwards, they stay on your property, that type of thing.
Yep.
Right? I mean, if everybody just kept their light on their property,
Yep.
this wouldn't be a problem.
Right.
Right? That would solve the problem.
Right.
So shielding lights, changing their choices of light bulbs, those blue and white lights that we've all kind of moved towards with LEDs are really bad for this purpose.
Right. So they're good with regards to energy use.
But there are
they're bad
LEDs you can get now that are better.
Okay.
Right? That aren't as harsh.
Yep.
Right? That technology is improving as well.
Okay. Right.
And so it's doing those things, turning out your lights when you don't need them.
Yeah. Well, that was another thing I had.
just
Putting
an easy
landscape
one.
and architectural uplighting on timers. Putting security lights on motion sensors.
Right.
Making sure lights shine downward, which we just talked about. But also turning your lights off when you don't need to be using them, which sounds, again, glaringly obvious, and yet we don't do it. Again, $2 billion of not doing it.
$2 billion of lighting the sky, $2 billion of just not pointing our lights in the right direction. It's just one of those things because the effects are enormous, and it's such a simple fix. It's not like a lot of our other environmental issues where you have to make major lifestyle changes or we have to do these it's not a big thing.
Right. And, to your point a moment ago, it not only is it being done, but it has been done. Flagstaff does it, but it's not even just here in the States. So Lombardia and most other Italian regions have done it. Slovenia has done it. 2 regions in Chile have done it. Part of the Canary Islands have done it. And I don't know if we talked about Tucson, but they're another one who did the lighting codes decades ago.
Yes.
Tucson
Again,
started
observatories and things like that.
They had
that
the
helps.
reason, the impetus to do that.
But it's a lot of cities, a lot of communities that are working towards it. New York State, it's the right step. They passed a statewide sort of lighting law
statewide
in 2014.
Okay.
And so there are things that we can do. There are things that are being done in some places, and it's just a lot of it is a matter of education. A lot of it is a matter of getting people on board.
And getting attention to it, right? To the issue.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about the safety issue, which is what I was going to ask next, but I don't think we need to talk. Although I wanted to say about Tucson, just jumping back a step. I just saw this as I was starting to scroll. Tucson, because of the lighting code, and again, I just wanted to mention this because it speaks to how successful these codes can be. Tucson hasn't gotten brighter in 30 years.
Yes.
Even though the population has increased 59% since 1980.
Right.
So again, to your point about how easy this can be and how it can be done, really interesting.
Yes.
Really, really interesting. Okay. Safety, not the issue we thought that it was.
And that's a hard one, right?
To convince people.
Yeah. That it really doesn't make them more safe. I mean, think about how bright car lights have gotten.
Right.
Headlights are insanely bright now.
Yes.
And it's more dangerous on the road.
Yep.
Right? Because you're blinding everybody who's coming at you.
It drives me crazy.
Me too.
It drives me crazy. Yeah. All right. Now we know. Now we're going to work on that. Okay. So given all that you have learned and seen in doing the research on this article, what is your sort of prognosis for the nighttime sky? I mean, it sounds like there's a lot that's being done in the right direction. Is it getting national attention? Is it all? We've talked a lot about Arizona and a lot about Texas. Is it more sort of a regional thing? What's your prognosis?
To be so a little bit of both, right?
Yeah.
It seems to be very regional, in part because those are the places that know what they're going to lose.
Mm-hmm. Again, because they have the observatories and the economic
and the communities. So a lot of these communities that have gotten involved, it's not because they woke up all of a sudden and were like, oh, we need to do something because we can't see the stars anymore. It's we've always been able to see the stars. We want to keep being able to see the stars. We want, future generations who live in this neighborhood, in this community, to be able to look at the night sky.
So a lot of it is...
It's preservation.
But also it's preservation because the people do have an aesthetic appreciation and this deeper appreciation about sort of the philosophical things we were talking about.
Right.
So a lot of the movement also comes from that.
Yeah, it comes from the philosophical. It also comes from the ecological things. So two of the women that I spoke to are part of the River Hills Neighborhood Association in Texas. A lot of these communities, fascinating to me, are very close to big cities.
Yeah.
So River Hills is 10 miles from downtown Austin.
Okay.
It's in the foothills of the hill country.
Right.
And they've been working very hard to preserve their night skies. They're both physicians. And so for them, it's also about the health consequences.
Really? Because they've done enough.
And
they're aware of this.
They're aware of this. They've read what studies have come out. So it is about the philosophical. It's definitely about the philosophical, but it's also about the very practical ecological consequences as well.
Yeah. And again, the ecological also being impacting us
right.
as humans as part of the ecology.
We're part of the ecology, yeah.
Fascinating. All right. So point your lights down, put shields on your lights,
yes.
get the right kind of light bulbs, turn your lights off, for God's sakes.
And that's just
That's just so obvious. All right. So we can't talk about when and where. Oh,
well,
go
no.
Yeah.
So do all of those things, but also go out, find a place where you can see the night sky.
And
if you don't live
about.
in
exactly.
one. I spoke to someone just yesterday at a holiday party who recently went towards Yosemite, and it was the first time. He's an adult. He's probably a little bit older than I am, so in his mid to late 30s.
Yeah.
It was the first time he'd ever seen the Milky Way like that.
Yeah.
Right. That is an experience we all should have.
Right.
And so get where you need to go.
Yeah.
To do that.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden this doesn't seem like hyperbole and
right.
dramatic artsy people who just care about this. There's
I mean,
there's something there.
I've photographed the Milky Way all over the world and in some of the darkest skies on the planet, and it never gets old.
Yeah. Actually, the Milky Way is pretty old.
Yeah, well, okay.
The Milky Way is really old.
Very old.
Yeah.
But it never
Taking
feels
pictures of it.
old.
Yeah.
Looking at it.
It's astonishing.
It really is.
And that's why, like I said, when I heard that you were doing this article, I just jumped on it because it is something that's just so important. And I was so glad specifically when I started hearing that people were talking about this.
Right.
And, just this relief that, okay, well, I'm sure we have a long way to go to address the issue. But the fact that people are bringing it up and starting to try to address it was really
right. And you asked me earlier really quickly that if it was regional or national, right?
Yeah.
And so there's definitely a strong regional component. But one of the nice things that's happened is the national parks and a lot of state parks have sort of adopted night skies as the thing they want to save.
Cool.
And so they're changing their lighting in national parks. They're doing a lot of dark sky related activities, star parties and things like that to educate people and give them a chance to see these things.
Right. And there's even a dark sky day every year. International Dark Sky Week.
Yeah.
Actually, do you know when that is?
I don't remember off the top of my head.
Let's see. I think I have it here. This year celebrations began. This was April.
Yeah.
They began April 15th. Isn't that tax day?
That is
That's
tax
a weird
day.
day. I guess you do your
It's
taxes
good
and then
day
you
as any,
celebrate.
right?
Yeah, I guess.
You need it after tax day.
Yeah, exactly. Go look up the sky. Think of something else.
Right.
And they ran through Saturday, April 21st. So Sunday through Saturday, and presumably it'll be around the same time this year. Okay, so thank you for that. And again, we're not sure where the article or when. Do we know when it's coming out?
So it should be out in May, June of next year.
Okay, cool. Of next year.
Well,
we're already in
2019.
December.
Right. It's coming out soon.
When you say next year, I just know that it is next year. I forgot we're already in December.
Right. It is December.
How did that happen?
Yeah.
I mean, December. What's today? The 9th. We're like
Yes.
really into December.
We
even.
are very into December.
I can't keep up. Seriously.
I don't
All right.
know where the year went.
I don't either. That's a whole other. That's a whole other. I know where it went. It went into doing the show largely, and it went into you publishing a magazine. So let's talk about your magazine really quickly in closing, because we have come to the end of our hour. But so you are one of the publishers of Hidden Compass, which is an online travel magazine. I had Sabine. I had both you and Sabine, the other founder, on. I don't know, 9 months ago or something, and then Sabine was on a second time. You couldn't join us for that.
Right.
You recently had an edition out, so do you want to just quickly touch on that and tell us when the next one's coming out?
Sure. So we had our last issue came out in November. The next one will come out in February.
Okay.
And this last one has sort of a great variety of stories. They're all about kind of transformation.
Mm-hmm. That's the theme.
That's the theme that emerged from the stories, and they go everywhere from our feature. One of our feature stories is dealing with monastery life of young Buddhist monks. The other one takes a very pointed look at sex work in Thailand. And it's a woman who goes there to meet these women who work in this field and men, women and men, and humanize them and try and get a sense of who these people, because they're all shadowy figures to us, right?
Yeah,
and so
easy to objectify.
Exactly. So that was one, and then a beautiful story written by Jamie Moy about her encounter with a bald eagle in Haida Gwaii, which is a pristine forest in Canada. And so there's just some great stuff in this issue.
Yeah. And do we know about February yet, or it's probably too soon? Have you started choosing stories for February?
We have.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No, they're all lined up.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So it should be
Anything
it's going to be a good issue.
Okay. It's going to be a good issue.
They're all good.
We'll just leave it with
but
that.
It's going to be a great issue, and we're excited about February.
Okay. And the thing that we should mention, of course, is that Hidden Compass is free.
Yes.
It's hiddencompass.net.
Correct.
I think,
Correct.
right? So you can go check out all the previous issues.
All the previous issues. And you mentioned my polar bear story.
Yeah. It is on there, isn't it?
It is on there. It was in not this current issue, but the one before.
2 ago.
Just,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Great article.
So, thank
Love
you.
that story. Thank you. And you guys do workshops. I know you just did one. Do you have any coming up on the calendar, or just assume something's coming in 2019?
Well, there will definitely be things coming in 2019. Yeah. We have some things on the calendar. I just don't remember the dates off the top of my head. But the one that I do remember is we are in September of 2019. We're headed to Paris with Don George and Catherine Carno.
Nice.
And that'll be a 10-day workshop from September 1st through the 10th. And we'll all be staying at a chateau. It's limited to 10 people. So small group, and it's going to be all about how do you find a story when you land in a new place.
You just walk around that chateau until you find
there
one.
Might be a story.
I mean, those chateaus are big.
And
there should be lots of stories. They've got history.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we'll be working on writing and photography in Paris.
Okay, that sounds good. September
1st through the 10th.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, and that again is hiddencompass.net. And if you want to know more about Sivani, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. This was great. SivaniBabu.com. And I just want to give another shout out also to the International Dark Sky Association, which is darksky.org. And before I do the final close, I want to mention again the website for this space, because again in 2019 you're going to hear a lot more about WordSpace Studios, which again is where I'm doing this show. And again, where you can apply for a writing residency if you might want to come to San Francisco and work on your writing for a little bit. But the website, again, is wordspacesstudios.com. So check that out. And again, there's going to be writing classes, book clubs, residency, and of course my podcast and more. So thanks again, Sivani.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks again to everyone for watching and listening for the past 10 months. That is all for this year, like I said. Thank you for watching and listening. If you like the show, please share on social media, subscribe, rate, and review on YouTube, iTunes, Google Play. And, even though I won't be doing any more shows for the next 6 or 7 weeks, of course, all the shows that I've done to date, whether when I was just on the radio or whether this incarnation where I also am doing the video, it's all online. It's all on my website, MatthewFelix.com. The radio shows, I've made them their own podcast, Words and Images. That's on iTunes, Google Play, and my website. And then, of course, this version, the video version, is also on YouTube's, and it's archived on Facebook as well. For more about me, my website, again, I've already said this, but I'll say it one last time, MatthewFelix.com. and all my links to the books, to the social media, and of course my new book, Porcelain Travels, are there. And if you have any comments, particularly with regards to, I'm going to try to scratch my nose without hitting my mic. If you have any feedback with regards to, I'm going to spend, during my time off, I'm going to take some time to think about how do I want to do things when I come back. So if you have any feedback on what you liked, what you didn't like, or what you might like to see that I haven't maybe thought of, I would love to hear from you. And again, you can send me any feedback at felixonair@matthewfelix.com. So thanks again for watching and listening. Happy holidays, and see you in the new year.